charm of every town. She told me essentially that the goal is to give volunteers who have worked with them on the cause of ending gun violence and reforming the nation's gun laws, who have been personally impacted, kind of the nuts and bolts of what it looks like to run for office. Many of them may not know, for example, how to start up a campaign, how to know what it takes for that office, how to fundraise if you're thinking about running. So they want to give them that, but they also want to provide them with something else really important. They told me there's a big mentorship component to this program. So it's connecting them with people who have already run for office, who can help them out. One person that is mentoring them is Congresswoman Lucy McBath of Georgia, and if you remember, she herself was a Moms Demand Action volunteer. She became an activist after her son Jordan was fatally shot in 2012.
If we won, then I was going to do everything in my power in Washington to elevate this issue in a way that no one in Congress would be able to turn their back on all the countless numbers of people that keep dying in this country every single day. I know why I am there.
Juana, how wide is this program? How many people did you see kind of go through this effort from every town?
Yeah, so that's a great question. There are more than 100 people who are participating in the program this year. Some of them are running for office already, some of them are thinking about it, and some of them are people who want to work on campaigns or who want to one day work on campaigns.
So Juana, you mentioned that there's over 100 people in this training program. I would imagine that running for Congress and understanding how to do that at a national level is extremely tough and complicated. So are they really focused on federal races, or is this more about state and local races?
They're looking up and down the board here. There's not one specific office they're targeting. Some of the candidates who are participating in this program that I talked to are not running for Congress. In fact, one of the candidates that I spoke to is a woman named Mia Levis Porter, who is running for an assembly seat in the Los Angeles area in California.
And it wasn't until actually 3 years ago that I started sharing my story. And once I did, and I saw the power of how it could inspire others to come forward and share their experiences and build a community of survivors, and how it had legislative power and it could move our electeds to take action.
So one of the things that Levis Porter told me when we talked about this program is that she appreciated having a community of other people who are impacted by gun violence. She herself is a survivor of gun violence. Her brother died by suicide with a gun after battling mental health issues for some time. And she said there was power in having people who were vocalizing the same experience that she had had, and who were channeling that into some sort of civic duty.
Hearing what you're describing, Juana, it feels a little bit to me like deja vu, right? I covered the 2018 midterms, and I remember doing some reporting at that time that found that gun control was a really big motivating force on the Democratic side. It became more and more of an issue for suburban women. And it was the first election cycle, I believe, to my knowledge, at least in any recent history, where gun control groups outspent gun rights groups, right? Meaning groups like the NRA. And that was really unusual. And it felt like in that moment, Democrats were really excited about the potential of making some changes in Congress, new laws, and then none of that happened. And Domenico, I don't know what you think. I know you followed a lot of races, but it does feel like the pendulum shifted, I recall hearing in 2018. But yet now what Juan is describing feels like folks are just trying to move that a little bit further, the conversation. But nothing really substantively seemed to have changed in 2018.
Well, yeah, you got to look at the levers of power and who's in control of those things, especially in 2018. The Democrats took over the House, but you need 60 votes in the Senate to be able to pass meaningful legislation. If you're thinking about whether Democrats, they control the Senate right now, why can't they get things done like passing restrictions or passing a voting rights bill or any other number of things? Remember, if Democrats are going to go with just 50 votes with the Vice President breaking a tie, they're going to need to sell the Senate parliamentarian on all of these things being related to the budget. So it's much easier to get things done and qualified that are related to money, related to the things that the government spends money on, as opposed to social issue things, which are much more difficult to create this kind of change without getting rid of the filibuster.
All right, well, let's take a quick break and we'll have more in just a second.
Support for NPR and the following message come from ExxonMobil. As part of its ongoing commitment to help address climate change, ExxonMobil is increasing the efficiency of its operations and advancing low-carbon technologies that can be deployed at scale. With that and more, it expects to reduce its absolute upstream greenhouse gas emissions by an estimated 30% by 2025. Learn more at exxonmobil.com/solutions.
Support for NPR and the following message come from Kroll. Duff & Phelps is becoming Kroll. Still the same trusted partner, now with a new name and more capabilities. Kroll makes complex business questions easier to manage. Visit kroll.com to learn more.
And we're back. And one question I have about congressional legislation. We've been saying that it's just really difficult for Democrats to pass any legislation given the numbers they have in Congress. But I guess beyond whether or not they can pass anything, what kind of legislation do folks want to stem gun violence? Are there kind of common themes that you've been hearing from any of the people going through this training program?
Yeah, that's such a great question. It's a question that I put to both people involved with the training program and other candidates that I talk to. I asked them, what does Washington get wrong about these issues? And all of them kind of said that the current federal conversation around gun violence sort of misses the point. It talks about it in kind of an old way. And one of the candidates I had a conversation about this with is Keena Collins. She is making a progressive challenge to Illinois Congressman Danny Davis. It's a district that includes part of the city of Chicago, where she's been a gun violence prevention advocate for some time now. And she told me that the entire reason that she is running for Congress, as opposed to some other office, is because this conversation needs an intersectional lens.
I'm running because if we're talking about the gun violence prevention movement, it needs to be victim-centered, survivor-led, and offender-sensitive. And some people say, well, what does offender-sensitive mean? That means that in places like Chicago, where we experience everyday gun violence, the shooters live right next door to the victims. And so my whole job is to make sure that I'm bringing an intersectional approach to the conversation, is to strike at the root causes of these issues, which are poverty and a lot of other issues that lead to everyday gun violence and lack of access to health care.
And one thing that really stuck with me that Collins told me in our conversation, she told me the story about a murder that she witnessed when she was quite young, where she knew both the victim and the shooter. And what she said to me about that shooting was, and I'm paraphrasing her here, is that the bullet was flying before anyone ever pulled the trigger in that killing. And she said the bullets are things like when public schools are shut down in neighborhoods, when there's lead in drinking water, when people are living in a food desert and they're not making enough money to get by and feed their families. She said those things are all contributing factors. So just talking about things like background checks and banning assault weapons, that's simply not enough to her mind, and that's one of the things that has mobilized her to run.
I think it's a really good reminder of the kind of gun violence that takes place every day and in which communities, because the thing, I think, Juana, as you've mentioned, that gets so much attention nationwide is when there are mass shootings. And then what we see in poll numbers is that people sort of expand whether or not they're in favor of gun restrictions right after one of these events, but then sort of reduce their likelihood to be in favor of those things after. But for a lot of people in different communities, this is a daily occurrence. And just looking at some of the research on this, some of the survey research, the Pew Research Center did a survey earlier this